Hi class, in this video I'm going to review how to create a solid model of this object. So when we are going to make a solid model, we'd like to go through how we're going to do this, and really the first step is to identify any symmetry. I don't have exact symmetry, but I do see a plane sort of right down the middle by which I could probably leverage for some form of symmetry. I think the next thing you want to do is identify the order of operations and which solid modeling techniques you're going to use. In this one, I believe that we could mostly use extrude tools. There are probably some other ways you can get to do this, but it looks like extrusions will be the main way to go. Now what we see is they're not extruded all in one direction, so there may be multiple extrusions that we could accomplish. And while this could be accomplished in one sketch, I'm going to show you how to do this in several sketches because I think it may be easier for most people to conceptualize. So I'm going to choose my order of operations of how I'm going to extrude this object. And looking at this, I see that there is some complexity that lends this to maybe one solution being better than the rest. If I look at this sort of bottom face, I can't really capture this angle face right here. So can't really use the bottom face as my first extrude. Also looking at maybe the top or the back face or the front face, I don't see an obvious extrusion. Actually, looking at the right face here is what I see is this face right here is suited to be the first extrude. And that's because there's this face right here, which is not one of the standard uh, faces. There's a feature on it that if I'd like to capture that, it's best if I don't have to build construction geometry planes, it's best if that plane exists after this extrusion, which it would. So I'm going to extrude this as my first extrusion. While I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and decide what my origin is going to be. And what I see here is this dimension is 24 and this is 12. So essentially right down the middle of this extrusion, I have somewhat of symmetry. And so I'm going to go ahead and place my origin exactly at the height of this bottom face and then right on that middle of that plane. Now there are other places it could be placed, but I'm going to go ahead and choose that as my origin. Okay. Then I'm going to identify my second extrude, and actually there's really not a correct answer here. I think the second extrudes could be done in either order, but I'm going to choose this feature to be my second extrude. Afterwards, I have this face, I could create a sketch on that. And then I'm going to choose this bottom feature to make my third extrude. That could have also easily been my second extrude as well. The reason I'm not doing this one first is there's actually some geometry on this plane that will be a little bit easier to define if we already have this first feature. And that's that this arc right here, or this half circle, it comes tangent to this line here. And what is implied is that this edge and that line would meet in a continuous thing. So if we have this first feature, it's going to be simpler to do. So that's why I didn't start with this sort of bottom face. Okay, so let's go into CAD and see how we can accomplish this. Okay, so now that I'm in Fusion, the first thing I'm going to do when I have created a new document is I'm going to check the problem statement and make sure that I'm using the right dimensions. So I'm seeing that this is in metric, and then I'm given that the dimensions are in millimeters. So I'm just going to double check to confirm that my units are in millimeters, and that is in fact the case. Now, if it were in inches, I could go over here and change the setting to inches. But now that's the case, I'm in good shape. I'm also just going to temporarily show my origin. I may hide it later for convenience, but I'll go ahead and show my origin. And so we had identified this face right here, and this is going to be the right face if we look at going this way as our front face. So I'm going to go ahead and look at the right face, and I'm going to go ahead and start my sketch on that face. And what we're going to do is try to sketch this feature here. I'm just going to go ahead and use the line tool, and um, what I'd like to do actually, as I've shown this, as I've created the sketch, I'm going to open up the sketch folder. That way I can look at my sketch and watch it to make sure I've fully constrained it, make sure I get that lock feature on there. Okay, I'm gonna delete anything. So my sketch is locked. That's because I have no features in that. So it's fully defined. There's really nothing. But remember, for full credit, we have to make sure our sketch is fully constrained. And so we're gonna, as soon as I draw a feature, like say a line, it will not be fully constrained. So I will have to constrain those features. And I'd like to actually, the easiest way is to make sure as I go, it's mostly constrained. Okay, so the first line I'm going to create, and if I'm putting my origin right there, I'm going to create this edge here, and I'm going to work my way around. Okay, and I've snapped it to the origin. So notice that I'm already showing, if you see on my sketch palettes over here, I am already allowing the snap constraints. But I snapped it to the origin. I'm seeing this green dash and vertical line here, meaning that I'm getting a vertical constraint. I would like to do that. And then before we proceed and maybe do a rough sketch with the line tool, I'm going to make sure that that first dimension is fully constrained. So over here I see that that's 10. And the reason I want to do that is that that's going to set everything to the right scale. If I go ahead and like make a rough sketch with the line tool, and then I go ahead and dimension afterwards, everything could kind of go out of whack, and then I could spend a lot of time just redoing the work I've already done. I'm going to hide my sketch palette for now, but if I need it, I can pop it out over here. Okay, so I'm going to continue working around. And I could probably use the offset tool. That might be a good tool to use. I'm going to see here as I drag over here, I've actually allowed it to be parallel. We see that it is parallel. I can hover over this and get a snap. And if I double click, that ends my line tool. So I didn't quite get all the geometric constraints. Those are the ones we'll work on first before we add the dimensions. So I didn't quite get all of those, but now it looks like I have all the geometric constraints in place. That was by design as I used the line tool. What I don't have now are the dimensional constraints. So I'm going to go ahead and dimension. Actually, the first thing, maybe let's go ahead and give this dimension here. We see that is 8. And then I'm clicking D for my dimension, but it's also up here in the Create toolbar now that we're in the sketch environment. So D for dimension. And then I'll just go ahead and work my way around. By clicking these two, what I see is I don't have the ability to do that 47-degree angle. But what I do know is that that's angle that's being dimensioned right now is 90 plus 47. If I don't want to do the math in my head, I can just type it in and Fusion will do it for me. And let's see, so what are we given here? As we work our way around, we know that the dimension here is 4. We also know the dimension here is also 4. Instead of typing 4 again, I'm just going to click this. And what that does, you see this fx being 4. That means that this is parametrically linked to this dimension over here. So if for some reason I decided to change the thickness to say 6, they would both update. I wouldn't have to update them separately. So that's best practice. So I'm going to change that to 4. I'm given this dimension here is 16. And then stuff is starting to come along. Now, what we can always do is if we're unsure of what is unconstrained, we can try to move stuff around. And so what it looks like is this length right here is unconstrained. And that was given right here as 33. So dimension, and I don't want it to be 33 this way. So if you kind of uh, go hover around, it'll snap to different, is it a vertical dimension? Is it a horizontal dimension? We want it to be that parallel dimension. And we're going to type 33. And that will fully constrain our sketch. And so now we see that we have the lock icon. Now everything is black, and I know I'm getting full credit for this sketch. Okay, and then I'm going to start my first extrude. So I'm going to extrude this profile. And then the direction I'm going to do here is to set my origin in the middle. I'm going to do symmetric. I'm going to do the whole width. And I've given the whole width was 24. So type in that distance of 24. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And actually looking back on the top here, I've got this feature here, which is not really a drilled hole. It's, I don't know, I guess you would probably use a drill to make a feature like this, but whatever this is, I'm going to actually go ahead and I'm going to re-edit this sketch. So edit this sketch. And I'm just going to include that feature in there because I'd like to do that. So I'm going to draw a vertical line here and then dimension that from here to there, that radius of 6. And then I'm going to use that to revolve cut. So I can take that profile, click and hold, and then I can select the profile. And then the axis is that just axis on the sketch. And so in that, it's going to make it nice and easy for me. I don't have to do, actually the hole tool fusion doesn't allow you to do a partial drill. So it likes to be drilling the entire hole. So this would be an error anyways if we tried to use the hole tool. So I'm going to go ahead and use that as an extrude cut revolve to get that feature right there. So that was something I can capture in that same sketch. So that's always nice. Okay, and so the next thing that we're going to work on is this profile here. Now we could do the bottom, it doesn't really matter at this point. I'm going to go ahead and hide that sketch. Um, and then I'm going to sketch on the face that I actually just created. So I don't have to create a construction geometry. I'm going to go ahead and project that face just so I can actually use that to snap to. And then using the line tool, I can click. If you click and hold, you can make an arc and drag that around the same thing. So that'll be that half circle. And so that's kind of nice. And one line tool, I could get that all done. This dimension here is given as 6. And then the dimension from the center of that half circle to the edge was given as 4. And then it's still not fixed. So see how we're seeing it's still not fixed, and you might say, well, what's going on here? Oh, I see. Now can't drag it to the right or left, but I can drag it up and down. So that would fully constrain it. And so the dimension that we're given is a 17 from the top. So that's why it was convenient to give this projection. I could snap it to those edges and I can dimension from the top. So it's a good idea to use a projection before we get started there. Okay, and so now that's looking pretty good. I'm not going to sketch the circle and use that as an extrude cut. You could if I would still give you full credit on the exam, but I prefer to use a hole tool because remember a hole is a drill feature. So let's make sure we add it as a feature instead. You would still get full credit if you did a circle and extruded that, but I'd prefer, right now I'll show us the best practice. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and extrude this feature. And instead of just extruding a distance of -4, what we're going to do is actually, and I'll show you why I'm not going to do that. Let's just say back in this original sketch, I decided to change this. Remember we discussed we could change that to 6. And what you see here is now this extrude didn't move with that edge. And it's probably the same thickness of material. So we'd like it to be linked. Now we could have made a parameter if we wanted to say thickness of plate. And then we could have used that parameter in that extrude and the dimension in the sketch. But if you didn't do that, what we should have done when we choose our extrude feature, so edit this, edit feature, what we should do is not a distance, we should do to object and to that bottom face. So the difference there is when I go and edit this first sketch and change this to 6, that face on that second feature would move because they are now linked together. I'm going to undo that. And so that's the correct way to do it. Both would have given you full credit, but it's always a good idea. Like if you make a mistake, this would actually help me in the long run. So now I'm going to use the hole tool. I can click on that center feature, and then the distance of our hole is a diameter of 4. And this is just a simple hole. So that's diameter 4. And then our distance is all. So it's just through the whole part. So also, instead of just choosing to type in 4, if we do all, then if we were to update this thickness, it'll continue to go throughout the whole feature. Okay, and looking back at our picture of our part, actually I forgot to make this slot feature that's going to go through this thing. So I might as well edit this second sketch and add it in there because that's is the same sketch plane. So I might as well add it in the same sketch. It's always good practice to minimize sketches. Now this probably could even be done in one sketch, but I think that's over complicating it. I think the best practice is to do it in the minimum sketches as possible while also maintaining as simple as sketches as possible. So if it's all in one sketch, but it's incredibly complicated and you wouldn't actually be able to visualize the features in that sketch, then that's also not the best practice. So what I'm going to use, instead of drawing a slot, is just the slot tool. And I like the center to center slot because it gives us a construction line that we can dimension. And so if I didn't use any of the dimension hotkeys as I go, I can still just dimension it after the fact. So we're given that that diameter is a diameter of 4, well, or 2 times that radius that we're given of 2. And then, oh, that was actually a radial dimension, so that's 2. And then the other thing is that this center to center distance we see between these center marks is 14. We're given that the dimension, and this is another reason why that projection was so nice, because we can dimension from that edge. That dimension from the top is 9, and then the dimension from the side is going to be 8. And so now we see that our sketch is now fully defined again. So I need to unhide that because I'm going to use it to extrude cut. So I take this and then I change the extent to this object, and by default Fusion has changed the operation to cut. But just make sure you understand that if you needed a different operation, you would change the operation. But by default, Fusion knows we'd like to remove that material. Okay, so now let's go ahead and make this bottom last part of our design. Okay, so I'm going to hide my other sketches, and then the plane I'm going to sketch on is this bottom plane. Alternatively, I could also select this face, but it's on the same plane. So I'll go ahead and just select that origin plane. So I'll go ahead and make a new sketch. And what I'm going to do is, because I'm going to be building my dimensions off that bottom face, is I'm going to project it. So P for projection. In case you forget it though, underneath the create, there's project and then project. So I'm going to click that feature and project it. So now I have something I can dimension off of. And actually, just for clarification, I'm going to just hide my origin, and I'm also going to hide the bodies for now because I just want to look at that, and I think that'll help me just see what I need to be sketching. And now that this is already to scale, I can actually just use the line tool for general sketching because it should stay pretty much within the bounds. Okay, and so now I've created a rough outline of it. I'm going to dimension this as R4. Actually, you know what? Let me show you. So in case you're not super comfortable with the line tool, um, this arc here, because you have to click and hold, but sometimes that can be finicky. This arc here could have been done using a circle tool. So for example, maybe I just did 2 lines and I kind of just got a rough shape that looked like that. I could go ahead and add a circle and then snap to tangency and then also make it tangent to both these other lines. And then that still gives me the regions I need to extrude. It doesn't have to be perfect to what you want to extrude. And actually what we'll see is I'm not going to sketch these corners. I'm going to add those as fillet features after the fact because dimensioning those is going to be too much of a pain. Okay, so now I can dimension this circle again. Now since this is a diameter, I'm going to need to give it 2 times 4 or 8. And then what I do know is that I know the distance from this edge to that circle center. So I'm going to say that is 8. And then stuff is starting to get fixed in place, but what we're seeing is this edge is not fixed and this edge is not fixed either. And so What we're given here is a reference dimension, but we could actually even still use that in our sketch. Oh, and it looks like I'm gonna just go ahead and make this coincident with that line. So that came unconstrained. So I'm going to dimension from there to there, and I'm going to actually use that reference dimension. I could still use a reference dimension in my sketch. Okay, and so now the only thing, I can't drag this up anymore. The only thing that's unconstrained is this edge. It can still go away. Um, but everything else seems to be constrained back to my origin. So looking around for those dimensions, I could also use that reference dimension if I don't see anything that I could use. Now there is other dimensions, like it's 36 from the center line to this other hole's center line. But since I don't have that feature yet, I could actually just use that reference dimension. So D from this edge to this edge is given as 44. And now my sketch is fully constrained, which is great, but I also need to make these hole features. And so what I'm going to do is use some lines for that. And I'll use construction lines. So I'll use this line, and then I'm going to L for the line tool. And I'm just going to add another vertical line. And I'm going to hold them both. So if you click Shift and click, that lets me select multiple lines. If I press X, or even if you just right click, that, remember that's always a good tool, and you can do normal for construction. So I've converted them to construction lines. That's because they don't need to be bounding lines here. All I'm going to use is actually these points at the end of the line to just define where I want to put my hole features. And so I need to dimension that right now. So dimensioning from this to this edge was given as 4. It's also given from here to here as 4, and I'm actually just going to click that, assuming that what the intent was that these dimensions were the same. So if I want to update this in the future, I can just click one of these dimensions. Okay, and then what I see here is this line, it's still not fully constrained, even though it's gray, and over here I don't have the lock, and I need to get that. So if I dimension this, this was given as 16. And then now it appears this line is fully constrained. This line, however, is not constrained. And I'm not shown where this whole feature is, but I see that there's 4 of them. So 1, 2, 3, there must be a 4th here. And I'll assume that that must have the same center mark. So I'm going to constrain these two to be horizontal to each other. And since this point is already fixed vertically, that actually has now fixed this one. And so now this sketch is fully constrained. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and finish this sketch. And then I'm going to go ahead and show the bodies. And the reason I'm showing the bodies, I'll show you. If I didn't show the bodies and just extruded these features that I'd like to extrude, and in this case, I'm going to do a negative distance of 2. Well, one, it's giving me this warning because the bodies are hidden. But when I did that extrude operation without the first body being shown, I have 2 bodies. Now for full credit, if this is a solid single body, all your bodies must be merged. And of course, I could, after the fact, go ahead and combine the 2 bodies, but I don't want to do that. The best practice would be in the extrude feature. So this operation could have been set to join, and then I would only get 1 body. Now, if I had unhid that body first, by default, Fusion would have chosen to combine those 2. Okay, I don't see that sketch anymore, but I need it still for my hole features. So I unhide it, and then looks like my radius is already on 4. And I'm just going to go ahead and click those hole center points. And then I'm going to change my distance to all, or maybe even just to that edge. Okay, so I've got my whole features, and then the final things to do, and I really recommend never adding fillets until the very, very end. And so at the very end, I can add these fillets. So I can add the one with a radius of 3. And then I can add I'm going to go ahead and hide my sketches for now. I'm going to add this fillet. It appears it goes all the way around, and that also has a radius of 3. So I actually could have done that in the same step as that other one. Okay, and now there it is. We have our final completed CAD. Okay, hopefully you found this video helpful.